So welcome, Penny. So I'm here with Penny Newton-Hurley, and Penny's a specialist in interpersonal communication and emotional intelligence and a psychological safety trainer and mediator. And she works with large multinationals and organizations across government, the military, health, and education. And her mission is to change the way the world speaks. And I was very fortunate to meet Penny because she came on a law of attraction and meditation retreat that I was running in Snowdonia in March of this year. And I was very interested in her work. Particularly, I was interested from a spiritual perspective, as I've seen on my spiritual path as it's unfolded, that what I feel I need to be happy has changed to a certain extent as I've come into greater connection with my true self. And I've got a few questions that I wanted to kind of ask her about her work, particularly in relation to that. So welcome, Penny.
Thank you, Tracy. Lovely to be here and see you again after that amazing retreat. It
Oh,
really
thank
was
you.
fantastic.
So, just to say a little bit more about Penny, and then we'll launch into some of the questions. She teaches the human language, and that's also the name of her book, which is coming out at the end of May. And she's devised the mechanism as a way of easily remembering the steps, which are mind, emotions, core needs, and action. So, I wondered, Penny, if you'd please be able to say a bit about your background and what you offer.
Yeah, sure. So, my background, I've always been interested in communication, right from when I used to speak in Morse code with my dad. We used to say, did it, dad, did it. Went on to do languages, modern languages, and then so noticed that, communicating with people was just so hyper important for me. And so not surprising, went into that firstly marketing, but then into communication in businesses. And it was when I discovered nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg that I really thought, wow, this has the power to change the world. This is needed everywhere in business. So I embarked on learning it. That was probably 20 years ago now-ish. And just sinking into it completely. Everything I could do, went on retreats, read, watched, met Marshall Rosenberg in person over in the US, and then started teaching it in business. So, and it's become something which is the bedrock of everything I do now. So I mediate between people when there's conflict and in a team. I practice psychological safety and train people in that, and I also train people in this deep communication method.
That sounds fantastic. Would you be able to describe the essence of nonviolent communication?
Yeah, so it's often called compassionate communication or mindful communication, and it's about various things. In a nutshell, I like to say it's about expressing ourselves authentically from the heart and listening empathically. And so that involves really connecting with ourselves. First and foremost, actually, it's very much about self-awareness and self-connection, and how we connect with others, human to human, heart to heart. It involves non-judgment. So it's about really picking ourselves up on what I call our learnt language that we've learnt through many years of, growing, learning, watching others, hearing others. And so it's about really picking apart our learnt language and realizing how, what an effect that can have on others as well as ourselves. And being able to translate it into what I call the human language, a more compassionate way of speaking without judgments, focusing on our feelings, focusing on our needs, making requests instead of demands.
Mhm. Great, thank you. And where did the initial teachings come from? I was interested from a spiritual perspective, because you get some spiritual teachings where people might do a lot of meditation, not always, but in some cases, and then they almost feel that teachings are downloaded to them. So I wondered
Mm.
whether, how the creator, it's Marshall Rosenberg, is that correct? How he
Yes.
kind of came to the teachings.
So Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, yeah, he was a psychologist, and he, in his book, which I have here, Nonviolent Communication and Language of Life, he sort of discovered it. He was in America, moved to Detroit in the 1940s, I think it was, and he realized it straight moved straight into an area which was very racist, and he couldn't understand how human beings could be like this to each other. So he says he had two questions. One is to find out what causes our disconnection, what causes us to disconnect from our integral, our instinctive, compassionate nature. Mandela said we are born to love and we are taught to hate or grow to hate. Um, so what disconnects us from that compassionate nature? And the second question he asked was what enables some people to keep that compassion even under really, really difficult circumstances. And he quotes somebody from the Holocaust, and Viktor Frankl as well. People who can see through some terrible, terrible things that other people do and see the human behind it. So that's where it started.
Mm,
Marshall Rosenberg, and he Carl Rogers was somebody he followed, and so he brought together this idea of nonviolent communication after Gandhi's idea of nonviolence,
hmm
peaceful but authentic. Um, and it brings, although it's a strange name, maybe nonviolent communication, the idea behind it is that our words really matter. They really can make a difference in good ways, but in harmful ways as well. When we
hmm
when we talk with people, they sink in, and when we make judgments of people, when we call somebody lazy, for example, that can go in. That can even create a core belief that plays out in people's lives, and it can affect us as well. So that's he was so passionate about sort of bringing a language that could help people to connect with themselves and connect with others. And his teachings really went right across the world. He used to do diplomatic relations. He used to go into prisons, and bring people together. Sadly, we lost him in 2016, but I was so fortunate to have met him and worked with him. Went on a retreat for 10 days in Albuquerque. So yeah, he was amazing, an
And it's
amazing.
interesting when you say that kind of to do with he was interested in why some people could still be loving, even in challenging circumstances. And then some spiritual teachings talk about following that inner voice of love or following our intuition. Sometimes called the still small voice. I think it was Eileen Caddy who said that.
Mm.
And does he kind of talk about that? Does he talk about like a distinction, like different parts of the mind, that there might be this kind of inner knowing, like the true self, it's sometimes called, that is loving, and then there might be the kind of louder voice, the voice of kind of the egoic mind.
Now that's an interesting question because of the in the book and other books that I saw and the teachings he gave, I didn't see him refer specifically spiritually, although I know my trainer and mentor did talk about him mentioning the divine. Um, what I can say is I know very much that he it was in him when I was on that retreat with him, an intensive training it was called. I witnessed several times when he was working with somebody demonstrating, just he seemed to be plugged into something, the
Mm,
universe, his higher self, whatever it was, and it sort of seeped out. It was tangible, and his wife Valentina, lovely lady. There was one point where she was actually giving spiritual healing to somebody while Marshall was talking with that person and empathizing with the person. So um, I have absolutely no doubt that spirituality was very important to him,
Mm.
and that it ran through everything he did, even though it wasn't very overt
I see.
necessarily
Yeah.
in my mind. And
Mm.
coming back to your last question, I don't know whether he had sort of intuition or whether it landed with him. I never heard him talk about that. Um, but certainly something that there was spiritual connection there for
Yeah.
sure.
Oh, that's fascinating. And when you talked about kind of the non-judgment, do you feel that's similar to the kind of spiritual teachings of mindfulness, cultivating the capacity to observe whatever's arising with a non-reactive mind?
Yeah, I do. I think for me, non-judgment comes because I've related it. Can I just say, because this might
Mm.
put it in context, I remember on that retreat with him, I remember thinking, um, I need to know more about this. What is it about the mind? And I did my research about the mind and neuroscience subsequently. Um, and I was trying to make that link with spirituality and all the other things that I'd learned, like a bit of NLP, a bit of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, and things like that. Um, and the one thing that I do think non-judgment links with in spirituality is I call it oneness or
Mm.
duality, where we are all, I believe we are all one. We're
Mm.
interdependent. We can't remove ourselves from the fact that we are so interdependent. Therefore, I think the non-judgment, what I do to others, I do to myself. And I think that's where it comes in for me, is that knowledge that we're all human beings, we're all in this game together, and what we do and say affects others and it affects ourselves equally. So yeah, I think non-judgment is at the heart of spirituality and nonviolent communication, the human language.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. And NVC encourages seeing the needs behind behaviors and has a focus on empathy. And how do
Mm.
you feel that relates to spiritual teachings on forgiveness and compassion, if you feel it relates?
Yeah, yeah, no, it does. And the thing is, needs is what it's all about. So
Mm.
it's the core. I call it in the mechanism, the C stands for core needs,
Hmm.
because they are at the core of Marshall's teaching and what I've done as well. Um, and it all revolves around that. So we have needs that in the moment they pop up in the moment, a need for safety, a need for nourishment, a need for to be seen, to be heard. Um, and we meet our needs in certain ways. And that's what it's all about. That is what it's all about. When we say something, when we do something, we are it's in an aim to meet a need. But we don't know that until
Hmm.
we learn it this way. We've never been taught it. I've never seen it being taught in schools in that way, consistently. And so yeah, I think forgiveness and compassion is all about knowing, if we know that what others are doing, that we think they're doing it to us sometimes, they're being mean to us, they're doing it just to spite us, etc. The fact is that they're trying to meet a need. And how they're going
Mm.
about it, Marshall used to say that they're going about it in tragic ways.
Yeah.
sometimes, difficult ways, even ways that don't suit us and don't maybe meet our needs. So when we know that, I remember that sort of really sinking into me. It was a big thing to learn when I know that somebody is just trying to meet a need, they're just doing it in a way that I don't particularly like. It changes how my relationship to them, it changes my relationship to what they're actually doing. And I think from that, that's where I can bring forgiveness, I can bring
Mm.
compassion when I can understand what their needs are. And in mediation, I always talk about an iceberg, and if you imagine the bit that pokes out of the water is what we do and say, the bit that we're familiar with, we see it, we hear it, we're talking, and this could be the judgment, so you're no good at this, or stop talking to me like that, that sort of talk. And then underneath the surface of the water is what's really important. That's where our feelings are that tell us, them give us a lot of messages about what's going on for us, and tell us what needs at the bottom of the seabed, if you like, are not being met. And when in mediation, people generally talk about the bit above the water, the story, what's happened, who's done this. And what we do is we bring them down beneath the surface to discover what needs weren't met for each of them. And when we get that understanding first of, oh, right, so that's what was happening. I wasn't meeting needs for this, that, and the other. Understanding our own and then being able to understand the others' needs and what they weren't be able to meet. There's what I call a magic moment. There's a
Mm.
magic moment that I have seen, and it is it. In fact, when I talk about it, I can feel the emotions bubbling up now of that magic moment of connection, where people discover something far below and deeper than all that was going on at the top. And I've had people who come into the room for mediation saying, I don't want to work with them anymore. I want them out of the company, getting up and hugging each other at the end. So
Mm.
that's compassion, that's
It's a
forgiveness,
miracle.
understanding. And that's, yes, it's a miracle. And it's based on those core needs, fundamental human core needs that we all have, whatever differences we all have those needs by dint of being human.
Mm. It reminds me of a teaching in the Course in Miracles, where it says that everything is a call for a love or an expression of love. So when someone's being loving, then they're kind of showing love. And if they're showing, it can be hard to kind of believe it at times, but if they're very angry, we might think, oh no, they're just being angry and opinionated. But the Course in
Yeah.
Miracles teaching would be like, that is a strong call for love. They're hurting.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we're not taught to express ourselves in order to say what we need and to make a request of what of somebody else and what they could do to help us meet our need.
Mm.
We're not taught to express that. So we come out with terms like, stop doing this, or just clear that up, or, just to help me out. Words and phrases that we're trying to connect with, but actually disconnect us from
Yeah.
others. And those thoughts and phrases go round in our own mind and get, pointed towards ourselves in self-blame and self-judgment as
Mm.
well. And that disconnects us from ourselves. So, another good reason or way that it links with spirituality, I think, is it is helping us to discover ourselves and really understand ourselves and our human nature.
That's interesting. We were chatting just before we started recording, and I was saying about this term of spiritual bypassing, where sometimes people
Mm.
might do a lot of meditation to kind of just rise above challenges and think, oh, I'm
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
peaceful, and there's all this
Yeah.
stuff below the surface that isn't
Mm,
resolved. And I was certainly like that in my kind of earlier years of meditation. And now I kind of see it in terms of, progression. There's different aspects of the human. There's the physical, taking care of our body. This is obviously simplifying it massively. There's the emotional, which maybe your kind of work kind of fits into that
mm,
in
mm,
terms of taking care of our needs, dealing with any unresolved emotions. And then there's the spiritual, who am I in truth? Who am I really beyond the physical
mm,
body?
mm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that emotional bit is so important. The meditative part, if you like, is about taking that pause. Pause is a big thing
Mm.
in these teachings because we're very likely to react, and I think that's one of the biggest things. I'm going off on a tangent here just to
Oh no,
explain what I was
it's
going to
very
say.
useful.
um, we react. We hear something or see something we don't like, and we react. That's called automatic reaction. It's our fight flight system, as we know, that protects us, that is always looking out for threats. And those threats were real threats, wolves and tigers at one point, and some people do have big threats today in this world. And a lot of the time, our mind perceives a threat. If somebody walks past and doesn't say something to us, or we've discovered we've been missed off an invitation list, or an email comes in and telling us something that we don't like. And so we automatically react. And I think there's when I looked into the brain, the last time our brain really grew was about 200,000 years ago.
Right.
With the front, yeah, with the front part, the neocortex, which is to moderate our feelings, our mammalian brain, where the feelings come in, um, and when we're in that fight flight, we're more in the mammalian brain, do something, react against it, whatever it might be. So that might be to say something out loud, shout, argue, or it might be to go within and not say anything, just sort of dismiss ourselves. Um, and uh, and so what we can do by giving ourselves the pause is to re to bring together the two parts of the brain, because when we're in fight flight mode, our brain disconnects, our digestion stops, our pupils dilate, our muscles get activated to move, to do something, to act, react. When we pause and take that breath, there's actually a lot going on in our bodies that we don't realize. It's that calming down, moving into the parasympathetic nervous system,
Mm.
rest and digest, and our brain, our cognitive functioning comes back and allows us to then see the situation differently. So, meditation and going within, taking that pause and noticing what is happening in our bodies, sensations. There might be some pain, there might be some pressure, there might be tension. Noticing that and then connecting with the words that come up. What am I feeling? Am I feeling anger, or is it sadness, or is it, and allowing those feelings to come out. We suppress feelings. We tell
Mm.
ourselves not to worry, don't get angry, and we're suppressing. Whereas if we allow our feelings to come out, they'll dissipate in 90 seconds, according to Dr. Candice Pert. And that healing, it allows more feelings to come through then, and then those feelings tell us what needs are not being met. So um, rooting and grounding ourselves in taking that pause and going within can help us connect with ourselves, and I believe then connect with the bliss part of ourselves, the
Yeah.
deeper, more spiritual part. And
Hmm.
that's where I think, we get more intuitive on what we are needing. So it starts with, looking at what I call the gear wheels of words for needs to identify them. And the more we practice, the more they become part of our language, and we get
Yeah.
more used to them. And when we can get more used to what's going on in us and what our needs are in the moment, what our feelings are, it gives us a language, and it gives us a practice and a habit to be able to connect with others, to wonder what they're feeling and needing, and to ask them and to have a conversation about it, which is hugely helpful to other people who might not have been taught this type
Mhm.
of language.
Thank you for that. A lot to think about there.
Mm. Mm.
And it kind of touched on this, but do you feel that nonviolent communication and your teachings have anything to say about needs changing as people progress on the spiritual path?
Yeah, so thinking about this one, needs, as Marshall said, they are in the moment, our needs.
Hmm.
A need I might have right now, and you too, is contributing to people's lives. Might be we might be meeting our need for purpose, and doing something that's really important to us. That's our need right now, here talking with each other. In half an hour's time, we may have another need. We may have a need for rest, or that might be here alive in us at the moment, but we're not meeting that need. But that's okay, because
Yeah.
we're meeting others. So they're in the moment. I think if we talk about needs changing through our life, certainly some needs pop up more than others, I think, for certain people. Like a need for inclusion is often in me, and but I think they're values. I think we can talk about values, and I feel that values are our compass, that they are guiding us, and we learn values from parents, institutions, peers when we're young, and I think as we grow, we bring some with us that they may change as we grow, into adulthood, and as we go through our lives. And I think that's where we might see changes. I think those
Yeah.
needs, though, those human fundamental needs, they're going to change during the day. They're going to
Mm.
change, from moment to moment. But those prevailing needs or values are ones that I think, carry a bigger sort of, not a big purpose, but they're the more guiding ones.
I
If
see.
that
And what do you
answers
think
the
about, say, if
question.
someone feels a kind of sense of lack and they're kind of thinking, oh, I need to kind of connect with more people, I need more excitement in my life, and then maybe they kind of go deeper on their spiritual journey and they kind of develop the capacity to sit with maybe that kind of lack of fulfillment or unsatisfactoriness.
Mm.
And then, I mean, that's been my experience that then over the years, like some of that's gone away, and then there's more of just a contentment just for being in the moment. Have you kind of seen that with other people as well?
Yeah, I guess. I think what popped up for me when you were saying that is that sometimes we mistake strategies for needs. And we make a big distinction in nonviolent
Hmm.
communication and the human language between strategies and needs. Needing a holiday, needing a people around us, needing more money, promotion. Well, people will talk. We will talk about those as needs or wants, or but needs, whereas they're strategies to meet needs. So I think
Mm.
it's important to, when we find ourselves saying, I need this, or I need you to do that, um, to go deeper and say, well, what is that strategy? What's the need I'm trying to meet underneath?
Right.
And so that might be, if it's only people around me, belonging, community. If I need more money, what's that? Is it I want to be seen, maybe if I want a new car, or is it safety, security?
Mm.
It's often associated with security and safety. And there are plenty of other needs. So it's sort of an invitation to go deeper. So I believe if I talk, so you asked about how if I observed it in other people talking for myself, I think by really focusing on when I'm feeling uncomfortable and happy, what is the need under here? It by focusing on that, it's helped me to be more in the moment. It's helped me to be able to identify more what's going on for me. It's
Mm,
helped me to be able to choose other ways of meeting those needs when those
that's
ways aren't
interesting.
working.
Mm,
And so spiritually, again, I think it helps us discover what's really important to us.
yeah,
You know, that we live in such a material world, don't we? And you know, it's easy to believe and yeah, that we need all these things. Yeah, it's deeper than that. It's fundamental.
that's interesting. So you kind of saying that in some cases, like the needs that was people progressing their spiritual path, some of the basis of root behind the needs might still be there, but they're almost being fulfilled in a different way. And what they thought was the need
Mm.
might not be the root need. Is that, I don't know if I'm kind of expressing it
Yeah,
exactly as you said it.
yeah. What we learn, I guess, in learned language, what we learn that we need, we find is only, yes, a route to a need, a route. An effort, an aim in meeting a need. You know,
Mm,
it's the way. What did Marshall say? In every moment, we're all doing the very best we can in that moment to meet a need. And but without knowing what needs are, we're sort of like sort of flailing around in the dark a bit.
yeah. Mm,
You know, and emotions are indicators of whether we are meeting a need or not. So when we're feeling happy, content, excited, um, the chances are we're meeting needs. So we don't necessarily think about it. When we're feeling feelings like discomfort, sadness, depression, the chances are we're not meeting needs. So it's
yeah.
the indicators. So listening to our feelings will tell us what's going on for us and will indicate then, therefore, that something that we're doing, it might be something we thought we needed, is a strategy, and that strategy is probably not working to meet
Mm,
our fundamental
yeah.
needs. So it's sort of like a cascade, isn't it? Of,
Yeah.
you know, we're
Sounds
doing
like that.
this, we're feeling that, we're either meeting or not meeting needs. And if we're not meeting needs, we can go back up to rearrange what we're doing and change it. And then our feelings might change to one of,
Yeah.
you know, happiness. Hey, we're meeting needs.
It's kind of
So
all
that's why I
interconnected.
yeah, yes, very much. So that's why I devised the mechanism because they're each of those four things, the mind, emotions, core need, and then the action, are cogs and they all sort of turn each other. So they all
Hmm.
work interactively and they're all going on at the same time. And so it's about identifying the different bits and they really make up the basis of self-awareness, understanding what's going on in ourselves, empathy, all of that is a tool for empathy, and all of that is a framework for being able to have a conversation with somebody that is more connected, gets to the root of what's going on, the needs,
Yeah.
and builds relationships and gets what you need, you know, gets your needs met. Because when we talk about our needs, we can then collectively decide how we're going to meet these needs then, even if we've got different needs in this situation and this thing that happened between us that we feel uncomfortable about. When we identify those needs, we can say, okay, what could we do? And I found in my experience that once people know what their needs are, the solutions come. They come easily. It's not difficult to find ways
Right.
to meet those needs, strategies that can meet both needs, find that actually it's not even compromise. When you know what the needs are, it's doing things that will meet those needs
That's
together.
interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for that. And are there any specific human language practices you'd recommend for those seeking a deeper spiritual connection?
Well, it really, I do come back to the mechanism. I think so if say you're triggered, we call it triggered. If something happens and you notice that you're going to react, or you have reacted, um or you're noticing feelings that aren't comfortable, then first of all we go to our mind to get really clear on what it was. So a simple one would be if somebody's walked past me and so I've in my mind, if we analyze what am I thinking about that, I've just been ignored. Now that's a judgment. It's because it requires somebody else, and we don't know if they were ignoring us or not. So what was the observation? What actually happened? Well, they walked past the window and they didn't say hello. That's the observation, a fact that gets it clear, my perspective and my judgment separated from actually what happened. So if I want to have a conversation about that, I can say, when you walked past the window and didn't say hi, rather than, why are you ignoring me? So
Mm,
that's the mind bit. And then it's, well, actually, how do I feel? I feel upset. I feel um, maybe sad, feel maybe lonely. The more feelings you get, the deeper they go to places maybe you didn't realize. So what's that telling me? Okay, the needs. I put my hands on my tummy for that, the core. What needs? Maybe to be seen, needs for inclusion, needs for um, uh, belonging, community, connection, communication. They're often several feelings and several needs going on. So now I've discovered, okay, so that's what's important to me. Another way of saying needs. That's what I'm longing for. So then the action is, well, what do I want to do about that? Um, maybe I'll go and have a word with this person, and I'll just say hi and say, oh, when you passed, I noticed you didn't say hello. I just, I felt a little bit upset because, I love connecting with you. I just wondered if you'd would you be willing to have a chat? Or it might be, I'm going to have a conversation where I'm just going to say hello and say, would you like to go for coffee sometime? And probably discover that she just didn't see me. Or I might decide my own action. Actually, that's enough. I know what my needs are. I'm just going to give myself some empathy now. Empathy, kindness. So that's the practice in a nutshell. The mechanism parts that you can do to that was self-awareness. So I've done that sometime when if you like, I can give you another real example.
that would be great. I was interested in an example, particularly if you've worked
Yeah.
with MVC in your life or someone you've worked with where it helped you or them to respond from love instead of fear.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of examples actually, and I just want to mention that method can be used for your own self-awareness to empathize with others. So what
Hmm.
might she have been feeling? What might she have been thinking? What might she have been needing? And also to have that conversation. So I remember one where it was particularly deep for me. So I've got one example of where that process really helped me understand myself, and another one where it involves forgiveness. So The first one, my son, probably about 17, came down to breakfast and I was getting his porridge ready and lovely time for connection. And he said something like, "Well, it's not ready in time. I've got to go. Why is it always late?" And so we had a bit of an argument. He went off and I absolutely cried my eyes out. And I sort of thought, okay, what's going on here? Because that seems a bit of an overreaction, you know. Often I'm late with the porridge. So I took myself off to my room and I sat there and I got clear on what was it that he said. Okay, he said, I'm going to be late again, or whatever the words were. Got it clear. That's it. Apart from my judgment, really, really took time to get what I was feeling. And I discovered that the needs underneath were to do with, um, I think it was belonging, community, um, and yeah, there were a couple more there. But essentially, what I discovered that I was starting to feel a disconnection because he was going to leave to go on to a performing arts school later that year. And I was already tuned in to how it could feel when he's not here anymore. And I haven't got the porridge to do, and we haven't got that. It felt so deep. I then cried again, and I sat there thinking, okay, I do want to talk to him about this. And I also want to really give myself a lot of empathy because um, it's a big thing that's going to happen. And I want to give myself the time to process that. And it was big. I remember the feeling and I thought, wow, that I didn't know that to begin with. So that was quite groundbreaking for me.
Yeah.
I've had many other instances like that and simple ones as well, where I've just got, oh, okay, that's what the need is. Okay, why don't I go and do this? The other one was really relevant because I was actually teaching this many years ago when my children were at primary school. They asked me in to do some of these lessons, and it was brilliant. The children loved it, but um, a few parents were suspicious. They didn't know what it was and they didn't like it. And so they said, I don't want my child in there. And I think it amounted to probably, it was only a small school, about 10 children, 8 or 10 children. So I had about 15. And so these children were in the other room, and I made it really fun. So we're throwing things around and guess the feeling and, tell me what you're needing right now. And there was a little girl who had autism, and that her assistant after said, wow, this is really getting her to speak about her feelings. She's never been able to do that before. So it was really great. And at the same time, I felt so uncomfortable about these children being out. And there was an anger in me. I felt angry, lots of things. How could parents not trust in me? So there was a feeling about not being seen for who I was, a need there, need for inclusion of the children, need for understanding, acceptance, all sorts of needs. And it really offset me for quite a while that there were people who thought that I was doing something that wasn't good, and therefore, their children were out of it. And I really spent time processing this. I really spent time, firstly, on myself, because we can give ourselves the gift of self-empathy. We can't rely on others. And we need to charge up our own empathy before we can give it to others. So I spent a long time empathizing with myself. And then I moved to them, and quietly, silently, without them there, I considered, how did they feel? How did they need? And it took a while to do this. I came back to it and kept coming back to it. And eventually I got to a point where I could release them. I could
Mm.
release them from my judgments, my anger, my feelings about them, um, and put them in a place of love, I guess, understanding how it might have been for them, and yeah, releasing them to be free to do and have that choice. Choice is a need to do what they wanted. And that and was another groundbreaker for me to to be able to do that. And coming, because previous to that, that would have gone on for years for me.
Mm. Holding on to that kind of difficulty, and maybe there's a
Yeah.
slight resentment there as well.
Yeah, resentment and that internal, I'm not good enough, I'm
Mm.
not being liked by everybody. It was touching several sort of core beliefs and probably difficult past childhood experiences. Um, so yeah, and I've been able to apply that in other circumstances as well. And I think it's a healing. I think it heals ourselves more than anything.
Yeah,
Forgiveness heals ourselves, but also I think that transmutes, if you like, into healing for them,
that's
spiritually.
beautiful. Really inspiring. I've seen that in my work with the law of attraction and
Mm,
other spiritual teachings over the years, that if someone never wants to think about someone ever again, is to train their mind to love. As those teachings would say, that the broader part of us is always in pure positive energy. And
mm,
when the physically focused part of our mind thinks in opposition to that, there's a
mm,
disharmony, and we can never relax. And then they kind of train their mind to focus selectively, not pretending they like things they don't like about the person or situation, but thinking, what is it that I actually do like? Then the mind relaxes, and they're healed. I also believe it can energetically have a positive impact on the people that they're
yeah,
focused on.
yeah, yeah. I think, there's a lot going on that we don't know about, isn't there?
Mm,
And electricity and all of that universal is going on, and it's affected by how we are, how we think, and how
yeah,
we talk. And so yeah, we can create great things, I think, if we learn to channel that.
absolutely. I mean, there's so many more questions that I could ask you, but I'm conscious of the time. I think that's a beautiful note to almost finish on. But before we close, I just wanted to ask you, if people want to know more about your work,
Mm.
what can they get? How can they get involved with you, and how can they find out more?
Yeah, well, I'm on social media, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, Penny Newton-Hurley, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and YouTube. My website is compassion.co.uk, so that's compassion with two M's. Um, and on there, I've got the business website, but you also can click a link to go through to what we call Compassion for You. So that's for everybody. And on there are at the moment 4 courses that you can get and work through that teaches the basics of the human language and the mechanism. There's lots of handouts. There's the gears that you can print out or have there for reference. There's videos, there's role plays, demonstrations, and there's also going to be a business course very soon as well, which will be part in coaching as well, online coaching. And also, I'm pleased to say this is just a proof copy, but after 8 years of toil, I'm finally publishing my book end of May, early June, called The Human Language. So yeah, look out
Congratulations.
for that. That's going to
Massive
be on.
achievement.
Yeah, thank you. That's going to be on Amazon and should be available in bookshops as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your time. It's been fascinating. I feel there's lots that I want to go away and kind of think about from what you've shared. Like the emphasis today, you were sharing about how it kind of relates spiritually to the spiritual path. That's particularly what kind of excites me, how the emotional side can tie in with the spiritual. So thank you so much again.
Thank
Hopefully
you,
see you
Tracy.
soon.
It's been lovely talking to you, and I get so excited talking about this stuff, and to speak about it with you is just a real gem. Thank you.
Thank you.